When my SNES days were over because Mario transitioned to a 3D platformer I didn't want to play, I jumped over to PlayStation where one of the hottest platformers was Crash Bandicoot, Sony's attempt to attract the kids who don't want the baby stuff Nintendo makes. Their tactic was essentially copying Sega and the Sonic games. In fact, Crash is heavily inspired by Sonic since he is a fairy with an attitude and gathers gems and fights an evil scientist. A thing Crash never had to experience compared to Mario and Sonic was a transition from 2D to 3D, since he was a product of the 3D era and was going for linear stages. During the year the first game came out, Nintendo was focused on perfecting 3D platformers, while Sega was still experimenting with that awful isometric perspective of Sonic 3D Blast. Imagine how many people gave up on them and went to play Crash Bandicoot, which was doing a fine job at showing what you can do with a third-person linear platformer. Despite the small amount of moves and the very limited space you could move around, the cartoony art style, the silly sound effects, the dozens of different death animations, and the fast way a Bandicoot was moving through the stages made Crash a must-have during the early years of the PlayStation. As a game it wasn't bad, but it's definitely the weakest in the franchise. Every following installment was making significant improvements, which were rendering the previous one obsolete. The first game, for example, didn't even have lip sync, and the camera was very high in the air, resulting to a very limited field vision and very dull backgrounds. Also, something that is problematic nowadays is that the objective of the game was to save your girlfriend, who is designed to look like a damsel in distress sex bomb. Yes, it's another game that was treating women as sexy and dumb trophies for the men. Something I never understood was why was she always greeting Crash at the end of every bonus stage? Why is Crash trying to save her when she's already free and right in front of him? Also, there is supposed to be time pressure, since if Crash does not hurry, the bad guys are going to brainwash her or something. How fast was he, or how slow was the preparation phase? The very intro of the game says, "The male escaped, prepare the female." How many days were you people preparing her? Anyways, the second game came out just 1 year later, exactly like in Sonic. It introduced another fairy that follows Crash but you can't control yet, exactly like in Sonic. And the bad guy has a space station and wants to gather powerful gems, exactly like in Sonic. Despite reusing the same playstyle, it had many improvements over the first, such as better body animations, lip sync, stage select, and extra moves such as crawling and body slamming. The plot still doesn't make any sense since Crash is gathering the gems for the main bad guy and without having any personal investment. Also, the scriptwriter probably realized how sexist the first game was and he erased Crash's girlfriend from existence. I'm not joking, she doesn't exist anymore. Imagine having to spend how many days in trying to save her, and then she just dumps you and leaves. In her place, Crash's sister is introduced, who doesn't do anything. She just complains and demands from the man to do whatever she says. What a wonderful way to solve sexism. Anyways, the third game was about time travel, because Sonic did that in Sonic CD. Also, the second fairy, his sister, is now playable, just like Tails was playable in Sonic 3. Don't you just love the originality? Oh, and the plot, how much thought was put into it. A mask was controlling the evil scientist all this time by being trapped throughout the first two games, and then it gets freed by the space station falling on its prison, which means the evil scientist could have freed it whenever he wanted it, and was somehow being controlled by it while being trapped. Fuck you, storytelling! Anyways, the improvements continue with even better visuals, a lower angle so you can see more detailed backgrounds, more play modes such as being underwater, or racing, or flying, and unlocking new moves by beating bosses, and thus being able to find previously unreachable collectibles. Oh, by the way, collecting all the gems was always giving you a different ending cutscene, but it was otherwise not offering any in-game advantage. Collectibles prolong the lifespan of a game when you search carefully every stage, but you are better motivated when you unlock more moves like in Sonic, or more stages like in Mario. Crash doesn't do that much and thus lags behind them in replayability. Anyways, after that each next game needed 3 years instead of 1 to be made, and the franchise moved to PlayStation 2. You would think they would have done tremendous improvements after taking their time, but as it turns out the 4th game is exactly like the 3rd. The visuals have improved even more and the stages are different. But there is absolutely nothing new here, it's exactly the same plot regarding evil masks getting freed, and the exact same moveset that unlocks in the exact same procedure. It's still slightly better than the 3rd because of the visuals, but it also feels more like an expansion instead of a new game, the same way Lost Levels was an expansion to the first Super Mario Bros. Instead of a new game. Anyways, the 5th game is an actual new experience because it's no longer about linear stages. It's now a 3D open world type of platformer, and you experience the same problem as I did when Mario moved from Yoshi's Island to Super Mario 64. You can get lost very easily when you're accustomed to 2 dimensions. With that said, the transition to fully 3D wasn't that hard, since Crash was always a product of the 3D era and the moveset didn't change much. Compared to Super Mario 64, you get used to it much faster. With that said, the highlight of the show is not the open world, it's the comedy. They did a splendid job with making you laugh as you play. The main bad guy in particular steals the show. He is constantly ridiculed and is constantly self-deprecating in hilarious ways. If you don't want to play the game, at least watch a playthrough just for him. This automatically makes it better than Super Mario 64 as well as Sonic Adventure, which was grimdark and depressing for no reason. The next 2 games came out very close to each other and man was it hard to get into them. They had a completely different art style that made everyone to look more childish. Same with the comedy, it got replaced with childish jokes. The main currency changed from fruit to crystals for leveling up abilities. You don't hit enemies by spinning, but by simply punching them. You don't stomp them, you take control of them. They were basically completely different games with the name of Crash slapped onto them. Mario Odyssey had similar issues, more specifically possessing the enemies and a different art style, but it was nowhere near this bad. The possession was happening way too often, making Crash an afterthought, and he didn't even look like Crash. In terms of gameplay, they are still better than the early games, but they are not Crash Bandicoot games. I don't know if those games killed all interest in Crash, because the next and latest game in the franchise came out 12 years later, and after getting a lot of feedback from the fandom. The art style returns to something closer to the original because they hated the other one. The gameplay goes back to linear because they didn't like the open world one. The comedy becomes a bit edgy again because they didn't like the childish one. And the story goes as far as deleting from the continuity every game after the 3rd, because just like it happens with the Sonic fandom, the only good games are the first 3. So let's make this clear, it's obviously made with nostalgia in mind, giving you more of what you liked in the early years of PlayStation and ignoring everything else. There is even time travel that lets you go back to the stages of the first game. With that said, it's not a ROM hack of the first games, this is not Sonic Mania or a new Super Mario Bros. Type of reusing assets. They gave it a lot of work and it looks fantastic. I see it as an even better Sonic Colors. Since both games have amazing backgrounds and they give the protagonist extra moves with certain items. Oh, and guess what else is back? Crash's girlfriend! You know, the one who disappeared from existence after the first game because of sexism? She's back and she looks and acts completely different. The feminists took over and she turned from a sexualized damsel in distress to a strong independent woman who doesn't need a man and has a weird SJW hairstyle. That was the thing I liked the least because they rewrote her into a completely different character. That aside, it's the most polished game of them all, and if you are going to play one, it better be this one.